Hi, it's Candid.
I'm a huge manly man, I get over girls. My dick is so fucking big, wanna see her.
There are many issues in the trans community, and one of them is that some people invalidate being non-binary by equating it to being gender non-conforming, which also invalidates gender non-conformity in a way. And I'm not just talking about people against non-binary, but also about those who are pro-non-binary. They describe it in a way that is identical to being gender non-conforming. So can we really blame those who oppose the concept of non-binary and call these people tomboys and femboys when those who are pro-non-binary conflate these categories? Being non-binary and being gender non-conforming are different. Non-binary means being neither a man nor a woman, while being gender non-conforming means not conforming to gender roles, regardless of one's gender identity. Feminine men, masculine women, and non-binary people who are not androgynous are gender non-conforming. But nowadays, people who see gender non-conformity and being non-binary as the same thing aren't just transphobes, but also the trans community itself. According to many people in the trans community, being trans can be a choice, and some identify as non-binary just to avoid gender roles.
Don't identify with having a gender because I found it really restrictive.
It gives me the freedom to express myself. If I wake up one day and I want to spike my hair and do punk rock makeup, I can do it.
Every couple of decades, some designer decides that men's shorts are, suddenly 5 inches shorter or 5 inches longer. Non-binary is freedom from that whole game.
I also know a lot of people, including myself, who used to think they were gender fluid because they equated gender presentation with identity. There's this worrying conflation of the two in our community.
You don't have to look a certain way in order to identify as non-binary. You can just say, you know what, this gender shit's kind of stupid. I'm a little fed up with it. I would like to feel a little more free in my life.
The word gender is annoying. It has 4 distinct meanings, maybe more, but I can think of 4. Biological sex, gender roles and stereotypes, gender identity as in which gender categories people identify as, and the original meaning of gender identity, which is an internal sense of sex regardless of presentation. Already in the 60s. 3 out of these 4 definitions are social constructs. Which ones? Categories of sex, gender labels people create, and the obvious one, gender roles. The internal sense of sex, however, is pretty much innate and present in children as young as 3 years old. We don't know the exact cause of this, but it's seemingly linked to prenatal hormonal factors. I've seen a trans person once state that if your identity would not exist without labels and society, then it's fake. Therefore, you're only trans if it's an inherent trait that you didn't choose. It reflects what gender abolitionists say when they claim that gender is fake. Without society and labels, many people who identify as trans nowadays would likely be no different from those who currently identify as cis. They only identify as trans because they hate gender roles and sexism, but they don't have inherent body dysphoria.
Trans is just about how you feel, and it can be about physical things, but it can also just be that you don't feel like you fit in with certain social norms about gender.
However, the point of view that gender is fake ignores the fact that people have an internal sense of sex that is seemingly caused by biological factors. It may be one of the reasons why talking about brain sex studies is so taboo in mainstream trans spaces. It's contradictory with gender abolitionism, an ideology some trans activists advocate for. Gender dysphoria is sometimes seen as something created by cis-normativity, which is the assumption that random people in the street are cis and that being cis is better than being trans. Gender dysphoria is sometimes also described as a subtype of internalized transphobia, which means that it would not be a thing if the individual didn't learn transphobia. Therefore, some people believe that gender dysphoria would not exist if trans people didn't socialize with other people.
Here comes the boom.
There was a book that I didn't read, but this part describes dysphoria in a very accurate and relatable way. Just in case I'm not able to find the screenshot anymore, it's a trans guy who describes his chest and he calls his chest twin peaks because he's dysphoric and he doesn't want to call his chest boobs. What was the reaction of the trans community while reading this? At best, they say that it's stereotypical. At worst, they didn't allow this trans character to describe his chest in a way that reduces his dysphoria. They also want him to use the word breasts when he could also say chest. No trans person should be forced to call their body parts with accurate words if it causes dysphoria. It's completely fine to call your chest twin peaks, to call your or even to call your But in 2021, some parts of the trans community doesn't really like people with dysphoria. We also can't use the term transsexual anymore, as some people dislike it, often because it puts emphasis on the fact that some people do have innate body dysphoria and wish to transition to the opposite sex.
Transsexual is not a word that we really use anymore because it just has a lot of focus on the genitals. That's the sex part in it.
When it comes to non-dysphorics, people want to be inclusive. When it comes to transsexuals, people want them to shut the fuck up. I've even had people tell me that transsexual is a slur. What are some slurs? Queer? You did reclaim that, didn't you? And why can't other people reclaim transsexual? Which isn't even a slur, by the way. Lacking dysphoria is valid because it means you didn't internalize dysphoria. Being transsexual is invalid because you have dysphoria. This mentality that gender dysphoria is caused by society affects many trans people negatively, but especially a category of trans people that activists rarely fight for some reason. I'm talking about trans children. If gender dysphoria is caused by society, then there's no reason to take trans people seriously, especially trans children. Young people are very influenceable and often like to ask for attention, right? So a good way to get rid of this epidemic of gender dysphoria is to ignore people who claim to be trans. If it stays, then psychotherapy is a better treatment than medical transition, as dysphoria is caused by society. Things that are caused by socialization, such as actual internalized bigotry and rigid gender expectations, can be treated effectively by talking about it to psychotherapists. So psychotherapy should also be effective to treat gender dysphoria, right? Then explain why, according to multiple studies, medical transition is beneficial to treat dysphoria, but not therapy. I'm waiting.
You know what's not cute? Calling anyone who encourages others to consider HRT as part of their transition regimen a trans medicalist. What are y'all even doing here? We cannot allow ourselves to fear trans medicalism so much, we gatekeep trans healthcare from the other direction.
It seems like the hypothesis of biological factors to gender dysphoria is the most likely. Something no one talks about is the fact that while studying the effects of the intensity and rigidity of gender roles in multiple societies of different types, it has been found that the most equalitarian a place is, the more gender differences in personality increase. Since there is no pressure to fit a preferred mold, people just do what they want to do. And some personality traits and interests are inherently slightly different between men and women. I would not talk about it if it wasn't at least partially biological. Basically, prenatal androgen levels increase the preference for masculine toys in young girls, and in addition to that, it has been found that female babies show a more prominent preference for dolls than for trucks compared to male babies, no matter if they are humans, versus monkeys or vervet monkeys, which suggests that it's very much a biological thing and it's also likely evolutionary. If men are generally physically designed to be hunters, then why would it be impossible for men to be generally mentally designed to have good social skills and therefore to be nurturing? And of course there are exceptions to that, but basically gender isn't fully social. It's also partially biological, and specifically hormonal. Guess what is one of the most common hypotheses for the cause of being trans? Prenatal androgen levels. Yeah, that's kind of hormones, you know. Recently, a group of non-binary people wanted their own equivalents to transsexual and coined three terms: transX, non-sex, and duosex. These terms are meant to describe people with body dysphoria and an internal sense of sex that's neither male nor female. Someone stumbled upon these terms and wanted to use the term dual sex for themselves. They tried to redefine it to include people who don't have dysphoria, going against a whole concept of this word. Nowadays, when people state that gender is a social construct, they often mean that woman and man are two categories that are purely social and that wouldn't exist without society. Any social category that is loosely linked to sex can become a gender. I've seen people claim that since lesbians don't fit social expectations for women, they are automatically non-binary. They see lesbian as its own gender.
That is legit the same Tupperware I give my 5-year-old daughter for school every day.
What are you saying? Say it again.
Tupperware?
Say it again, slow.
Tupperware?
Slow, very slow. Say the first syllable.
Tub.
Wrong.
What do you mean wrong?
I thought I caught that. You're throwing bees at me. It's
what
peas,
is it?
Peas, babe.
They want to fight gender roles by putting people who don't fit social expectations in the non-binary category. Once again, conflating being gender non-conforming with being a whole different gender, which I find sexist. You're not fighting sexism, you're fighting against gender non-conformity. That kind of view may also explain why some people treat trans men as a separate category from cis men. Transgender and cisgender are genders according to some people, and it shows on surveys that try to be inclusive. I hate it. This separation between cis men and trans men is often used to portray trans men as less predatory or even superior to their cis brothers. Activists and people who lack dysphoria often think they are honoring trans people and helping them feel comfortable and accepted, but what they're really doing is provoking dysphoria and alienating trans people from their own gender.
If you're trans and you want people to believe that you're cis, what the fuck is wrong with you? Get help! Like, seriously, what's with the internalized transphobia these days? That's neither normal or healthy. Get help, please.
The goal of most dysphoric people is often to be as close to cis people of their own gender as possible. Exception made for non-binary people, of course. If you just put trans men in the man category and trans women in the woman category, then it's great as it alleviates their social dysphoria. But once you insist on maintaining a distinction between cis people and trans people of the same gender, you actively go against the process of many people's social transition. Like, sure, many trans men can bleed, and a few do get pregnant. But in my experience, the huge majority of trans guys would rather not be reminded of it, and would prefer to be lumped with cis guys rather than people who share the same birth sex as them. They are trying to transition away from it, so please allow them to do so. Last and not least, the trans community is filled with huge, not so well hidden hypocrites. There is this notion that people who don't belong to a specific group should not speak over those who do. This is a pretty left-wing concept, so the trans community generally agree with it. Yet, once a lesbian disagrees with the hyper-woke definition of lesbian, trans people who aren't lesbians feel entitled to tell her that her definition of lesbian is wrong. Something that many people pointed out before me is the fact that trans people who belong in cultures without third genders love to glorify the cultures that do, even if it means speaking of the people who actually belong to these. That's the concept of noble savage repackaged for trans identities, and that's also often a form of whitewashing, which is racist. Now, are these cultures really trans-friendly? The actual answer isn't yes, it depends. To make it short, some cultures rely on self-identification, some don't. Gender is sometimes used as a synonym for sex, like in dualism, for example, that has 6 genders based on 6 categories of sex. Some cultures accept cross-dressers and call them a third gender while rejecting people with body dysphoria. There are also cultures that accept people with body dysphoria and call them a third gender but still kind of dislike them. And then there are cultures with third genders that are in Europe, like the Femminile of Italy and the Swan Virgins of Albania. Yes, the concept of third genders aren't just a non-white thing. Talk to people who belong to specific cultures with specific genders if you want to learn about them. Don't listen to people with the same set of beliefs as you. Listen to people who belong to these cultures even if you don't share opinions with them. What is important is that they belong to the culture, not their beliefs. And their beliefs are likely influenced by their culture, so anyways, listen to their perspective. In conclusion, people who aren't part of a Native American tribe, shut the fuck up about Two-Spirit. Thanks in advance. This is the end of this fucking rant. I don't really have much to add yet. I mean, I have stuff to add, but for other videos, so I'm gonna make other videos. This was just many things mixed in one video. Anyways, this is the end of this video. I hope that you liked it and see you for another video.